Hey everybody, it's Mike Badger from BadgerDad back with another Dresden Files review. This is for Book 6, Blood Rites. And if you haven't watched any of my reviews before, or you're catching up, typically we do it in two ways. We have our spoiler light to spoiler free section at the beginning, and then we jump to spoiler heavy where we start to connect the plot points of the series, which I've already started to lay out in my prior videos. If you haven't watched Summer Night, Stormfront, Full Moon, Great Peril, I've done them all on the channel. You can check them out. In this one, we're going to pick it up with Blood Rites. The building was on fire, and it wasn't my fault. Boo, mic drop. And so, one of the greatest modern fantasy lines introing a book was written. This is a phenomenal line for those who know Harry and for those who don't know Harry. This whole opening scene was crazy, was hilarious, crazy, ridiculous, over the top. I'm not going to talk about it. Just if you haven't read it before, you read it, you will be laughing hysterically. The most important takeaway from this scene is that Thomas is back. Thomas, yeah, that guy from book 3 and 5, he's back again. And his relationship with Harry has clearly developed. They're sparring of wits. They're hilarious. And we have another question. Why do you do what you do? That's a recurring theme. If you haven't watched my Death Mask video, I talked about how that's a recurring theme. It seems to be, why does Harry do what he does? That's a pretty big theme that's going on in this series. And you might want to ask yourself that question, Harry, because you're ridiculous how you're doing, living your life, and the craziest day of the year that we get to live with you in the books. Core aspect I want to note is that I mentioned in Death Mask review that there was a plot A, plot B issue where Butcher was struggling a bit between a plot A that's very much a massive apocalyptic struggle in the moment, and then you have a plot B, which is a massive apocalyptic struggle in the long term. The fact that you had plot A and plot B, the plot A invalidated to some degree the plot B because you can't deal with we're all going to die to like nuclear wasteland if you're about to get shot in the present, and that ended up not quite working that dynamic. So now we have in book 6, we see Butcher further try certain things, and the biggest takeaway, I think, is that this is further proof that Butcher is changing up the way these stories are going to work going forward. So as I said, plot A, plot B. In this one, we have plot A, plot B, plot C, and what you think is typically the plot A, what you think is going to be the running plot line of the book, because it says so on the back cover, and because it's the first couple of chapters of the book, you think, aha, I figured you out, Butcher. I know what your plot A is. The plot A, I would argue, is the plot C of this book, which is crazy if you think about it. But it's crazy that the selling point of the book, the drive of the book, the intro of the book that sets up for this stage, we'll call it. Anyone who knows theater, you go into the theater before the performance, you're sitting in your chair, and you look at the stage, you're like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And the stage is super boring if you're there early because it's just a stage. It's just a bland platform. You need everything. You need a stage. You need everything on the stage. But until the stuff is on the stage is kind of boring. That would be the metaphor I would use for how this book is set up. It fools you by thinking that here's the stage of what we're going to work with, and we're going to build on this and make it into something crazy. And yet, the movable props, the movable plots that come on and off the stage are the actual attention of this book. And so don't get confused, the one around the mystery, the entropy curse, the what's going on, Harry was hired to figure things out, like the core driving mystery that pulls him into this whole thing is actually the plot C of the book. Not very interesting, cartoony and silly and not well resolved. And you know what? It doesn't matter because this is where Butcher changes up things, where his plot A and plot B, a little more balanced, but still you have that plot A superseding plot B, or at least plot B in this case, which is the Black Court, and the plot A, which is the White Court. They kind of pull at each other. I would argue that the Black Court one has more of an immediate impact on Harry's life than the plot A of the White Court does. But they're both pretty big impacts on Harry's life, and it's more that their tension between them that pulls Harry away. Again, the White Court one seems to be the core driving motivator for what Harry's ends up doing throughout, which is the plot A, what's up with the White Court, figuring out what's going on there, and a big, big, big twist that happens smack in the middle of the book around the White Court. Whole situation it feels like it's being the life sucked out of it, vampire style. The blood's being sucked out of that plot line by having the Black Court alongside it, because the Black Court plot line tugging away incessantly at your attention and Harry's attention. And while it breeds great drama in the moment where Harry has to pick between what he's going to do, where is he going to go, what is his priority, it ends up still feeling like plot A and plot B are eating at each other and not quite sitting alongside. And then the plot C, which was the core of the book, supposedly, or at least that's what you would think, is simply there just to have Harry be in the mix, which I thought is very interesting. Butcher's trying something new. I didn't think it worked, but the saving grace of this book, and the reason I would still suggest someone reads it. It might not be rereadable material. There's definitely a lot of criticism online about the weaknesses of this book in terms of the sexualization of stuff that goes on in the book, in terms of the sheer amount of absurdity that happens in this book, the fact that Harry's going into a hypersexualized environment when he's Harry, and we're seeing it from his perspective. So I can totally see how it would turn a lot of people off reading this book. I get it. It does have some of the best humor in the series to date, which I think is a saving grace. There's a lot of really great lines in this book. It's probably the funniest overall. I've been tracking my favorite lines as I read through the books, and it has, I believe, the most number of lines where I was actively chuckling. So you end up with your plot A, plot B, plot C, and I don't think it all works, and I can see some of the criticism of the book, but the core takeaway, I would say, is that if you're reading the Dresden Files and you are starting to fall in love with the characters and enjoying the non-plot moments, which is what I argue in my Death Mass review is Butcher's strength, that he's so good. He's so good at writing those little vignette chapters, little vignette sections where it's not about a given situation that's happening. It's the moment, in the moment. What are the characters experiencing and working through? Those are what make the series so great. Because think about it, if you're writing a giant series, and almost every epic fantasy, I would argue, has this problem, which is that as you write book after book after book in an epic series, the plot itself starts to run into formula problems, where it feels like you're reformulating stuff. Things come out as formulaic the longer you need to drag a story over time, even if you planned it ahead of time. You have slowdowns and drags throughout the series. And Butcher's books rarely have filler in them anyway, because he keeps calling back to stuff and bringing characters back that you thought were just left and done, and then he brings them back and evolves them. So it's very rare that there's just random, almost never, and you just may not know in the moment what it's there for. But the biggest thing is that these vignettes are his way of making it not about the plot. Sometimes the plots are not going to be as strong as other plots, and sometimes they feel a little formulaic, but because it's so much about how certain characters engage and how these vignettes weave your heartstrings into love with the characters, it almost doesn't matter when he pauses from the plot. Why are we stalling? It's not a stall because the character moments are so intense and so meaningful. In a lot of ways, they supersede the plot. You want to read for those vignettes of character. This is how I think he keeps it fresh, because each book has certain aspects that feel typical Dresden, typical Butcher. You don't feel like you're reading a formula writer. And I think it goes back to these character moments, these little vignettes of humor. Sometimes there are these cartoony, ridiculous scenarios that just are laugh out loud hilarious, and you kind of put aside the plot in your mind because you're having so much fun. And sometimes it's because they do so much for you emotionally that you're kind of like, okay, I guess, where do you want me to go next? I don't care where we go next because I'm engrossed with the characters themselves, and I don't really care so much about the plot you're working on. That's how I felt reading Blood Rites this time, where there was some stuff I was kind of skimming over and wasn't as interested in, but the book kept me consistently engaged and has a whole bunch of big character moments. Now, the question is, do you need to read this book? Some of the other books in the series you might argue you could skip. Is this a skippable one? I would say yes. There's some huge moments, but you don't need to read this book. I would suggest you do, especially if it's the first time you're reading the series. You might not want to reread it in hindsight, but there are some incredible character moments in this book that would be lost if you don't read it. That would be the spoiler-free section of this review. I'm going to go into the spoiler-heavy section now. So what I really found interesting about this book is this is the first real vampire one we have. It's dedicated functionally to White Court and Black Court. We've already been introduced to Red Court through a couple of books. What I found fascinating is that vampires that exist together stick together. The vampires, it's not the White Council's fighting the Red Court in a vacuum. The White Court and the Black Court are more or less alongside the Red Court. They're not friends. They don't work together. They're not planning to take down the council together. That aspect of it is not happening. But they're not friends. They really aren't. And supposedly, right in the opening chapters, Thomas tells Harry straight up, like, we're at war with one another, right? It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. The vampires are all together opposed to the wizards. hasn't come across that way before. Before, the implication was the Red Court's doing their own thing and the other vampire courts are hanging out. But then you might say, well, wouldn't the other vampires take advantage of the Red Court being stretched and fighting this war? To some degree, they are, but they're also in it together. They are one giant court, one giant family. That gives them a form of a common ground, which I thought was interesting. We get to meet Mouse. I love this whole running thread of Mouse being Harry's like, I'm not keeping him. I love that whole thing with Mouse. I know he's not called Mouse in the book, but at the very end, Harry names him Mouse. How big can he get? I'm not keeping him. And then he ends up keeping him. But yeah, I love we get to meet Mouse and he gets to be in his element where there's so much cute little puppy stuff throughout the book. That's just excellent stuff. We get Thomas and Harry forming the relationship. The Thomas moment in the middle where Harry gets to know the real Thomas was really great. It was really great. Butcher can make me cry at things. He's very good at emotional. This was a very intense scene. Super intense scene. And you really start to feel for Thomas. Forget the fact that he's Harry's brother. Like that whole mind-boggling situation was like, what? And you start to wonder who else, or does Harry have any other siblings or any other family connections we don't know about? We got to meet Harry's mother, also huge. Little bits of her here or there throughout the series so far. This first time we get to see her in person, so that was really cool. White Court, inner battle, and the fact that White King, that he's all facade and was taken down by Margaret, like that whole scene being revealed of how they function, how they work, it's so messed up and yet so excellent at the same time, how that set up. And the fact that Harry is stuck in the middle of all of it, you can already start to feel the frenemy aspects between him and Lara, Thomas and Lara. The core plot of Entropy stuff was forgettable. Ebenezer being let down, like this is, I thought, fascinating. For anybody who's had heroes in their lives, which we've all had someone who we look up to somewhere in our lives, inevitably someone in that position will, almost without fail, let us down in some way. It's a guarantee in life. You put someone on a pedestal, they're human like anyone else, odds are you will find out something about them, or they will do something that will shock you, perhaps change your view of how you view them. And we've seen Harry put Ebenezer on a pedestal, defend him to the point of shouting, yelling, you don't have the right to talk to him this way, sir. He really puts Ebenezer on a pedestal as someone special to him. And yet this is the first time we get a major crack driven into that relationship. We see that Harry is so broken and so disappointed by it. We've heard Harry, in hindsight, disappointed by this. When Justin DeMoran, who was his mentor and wizard, when he finds that Justin DeMoran's trying to mess with him and he has to kill him, it's all in hindsight. It's all years ago. With Ebenezer, it's in the moment. And Harry's also a bit older. He's in his late 20s, so he can appreciate more the letdown. It's not a purely gut, raw, emotional one. It's a shattering of... He's built himself into someone based on Ebenezer. Versus with Justin DeMoran, where it was more my mentor and protector, because I'm a kid, I'm a teenager, has turned on me, is one thing. Having the person you spent a decade plus of your life developing yourself to try to emulate and be like, having that person let you down is a totally different experience. So I really like that Butcher took in that direction. The Ebenezer Harry connection, great like grandfather, grandson sort of feeling to it. And the Ebenezer that we're left with here, where Harry's, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to deal with you, get out of here. It's just raw. It hits me raw as someone who's also about 30. I'm close to Harry's age, I think, when this book is happening. And it's tough. It's really tough to have that happen in your life. And I think Butcher really nailed that scene. We have Kincaid back. I don't particularly like Kincaid without Ivy in the mix. It's fine. I mean, he's designed to be boring. Yes, he plays off Harry. Yes, he's like, some of that stuff's fun where he's outwitting Harry or deadpanning Harry. He's like, stop being a wise ass. And he's like, stop. I'm the one who's the wise ass. Stop being the wise ass king. I also like that there's a tension there between Murphy and Kincaid and Harry, where Murphy's she's always been intrigued by Harry, but Harry's wizardry and his turning everything personal makes it very difficult for her to envision something more between the two of them romantically, which I think that's great. I want Butcher to keep that more in the series. I don't want Murphy to be a default romance. If they're going to have a romance, it should be long-term, over time, developed, and as mature, older people who are maybe different positions in life, that would be somewhere to go. I do not want her to just be the token, oh, Susan's not here, well, we'll just make Murphy the token girlfriend, and I really like that about it. I like that there's a deflection here where Murphy can go to Kincaid, where Murphy and Kincaid can have a sort of a tension going on without Harry in the mix. Some of the attraction of Dresden is his whole getting into things, getting into messes, killing monsters. Kincaid checks a lot of boxes that Harry has, but there's not a whole lot of baggage to go with it. So I could see that going further and drawing Murphy away from the Harry romance subplot, which is implied. You think it's going that way because in this book, you get to meet Murphy's family. Also, kudos to Butcher. That whole scene was just delicious. And that's like a perfect vignette if it was just Harry meeting Murphy's family and nothing else. I'm sold. I want to be there. So that was really cool. I also want to talk about Harry's irrationality around protecting women and how it almost gets him killed several times in this book. It's getting a little annoying. I don't think Butcher is such an immature writer at this point. He's been writing a number of years. He's moving into his 30s. I really don't think that this Harry protecting women to an irrational extreme is just more of Butcher's having Harry be this immature. I think at this point, there's something more going on here. I mentioned this in earlier reviews. There's got to be something going on here in terms of Harry's need to protect those weaker. And he latches on to the women and children because that's the primal male is the protector. But it's so irrational and so self-sacrificial. There's got to be more going on there. I also really like how Kincaid unveils the fact that wizards killed with a sniper rifle can't use their death curse. That has huge implications for the series. No one's thought about that? And Harry's like, well, I guess they haven't. Otherwise, people would do more of it. Wow, that makes us outdated. It was great. It was great foreshadowing. There's a whole thing in the series about magic being behind the scenes. And there's a question of if the magic came out from behind the scenes in a way that no one could ignore, some kind of apocalyptic event, some kind of massive creature or army in a World War level event, apocalyptic event happens that no one can ignore. Does this mean that the mortals will wake up and realize and be able to leverage it against the magical community? And we know that they've already figured out ways to take down Black Court vampires because of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but this is the equivalent of for wizards. All you need is a team of snipers, and you can deal with some of the most powerful wizards on Earth. And a number of other magical creatures have similar weaknesses. So I thought that was really interesting how he implies that technology really does outstrip a lot of the seemingly invincible magic stuff that we talk about. And that if enough humans get together or enough technology is leveraged in the right way, you can overcome centuries-old beings. Then we have this question about Arturo being unaffected by White Court because of love. This whole thing was a little confusing to me. Maybe you guys can explain a bit below if you know better. What's the whole deal with the love and the White Court? Because it doesn't seem to work in equal measures. If someone's in love, then the White Court can't touch you, but they can still influence you. But with him, they can't influence him at all. I was very confused about that. It seemed to be a bit of whenever it's convenient for Butcher to do, and I don't know if that's truly the case or I'm missing something. Then, also interesting, the White Court starts as regular children. The question is, Red Court, Black Court, do they just start as monsters? Or do they also have some sort of embryonic or child form? Seems like a real weakness for the White Court if they are regular children, and it takes them a long time before they could become White Court. We also have for the Black Court, again, I want to talk about them a little bit in a separate video, but we also have at the Black Court the implication in this book that they can spread super fast, which is why Harry has to shut them down. I was not buying this, how quickly he implies the Black Court can spread. Because, yeah, maybe there aren't a ton of Black Court vampires, but if they can spread in a number of weeks to dozens or hundreds of individuals, they can make thralls all over the place. I don't know if this was just for tension. It really did not work for me, how quickly the Black Court can spread. And I need to do a bit more research into that to see if Butcher's talked about that topic more. But that does seem like a miss, unless it's just Harry's subjective opinion. I got to do this now because I think, and he doesn't actually know. But that was something that didn't quite work for me. It took me a bit out of the moment. And there are some other things, small little drops and teasers, but I think that covers the bulk of this book. And as I said, for me, it was not one of my favorite books, but it did have some of my favorite vignettes, some great character work, and it has the most humor in the first Six Dresden Files books, which to me, a lot of what makes Butcher fun to read is how good he is with humor on the page. And I really like that. So I think we talked long enough about this one. Looking forward to doing Deadbeat next. If you guys have any comments, thoughts, love to hear yours and have a discussion down below in the comment section. So please drop one on your way out. And as always, Mike Badger, I'm signing out. See you guys next time.